I'm Philip Bither, the Curator for Performing Arts at the Walker Arts Center, and sitting with me is Joanna Haigood. 2 days ago we just had the second and last performance of a major site-specific work called Picture Powderhorn, and we're sitting on the site of the grain silos that served as the home for this work, and this is our chance to talk a little bit about the process and the project. It was a magnificent work that included aerial dance, video, electronic music, sound score, and about 4,000 people from the community who turned out over the 2 nights to see the finished production. This is a project, Joanna, that we've been working on for a couple of years now, and I just wondered if you would want to start by giving any general impressions. Now we're within 48 hours of the work ending. But just how you feel about it, and still numb, both of us still numb, how you feel about the work that was accomplished and where you feel the piece is right now.
Well, where I feel the piece is I think we're off to a very good start.
Right.
Seeing that this is a series and it's going on to 2 other cities, that what we're beginning with, or this structure, this preliminary structure, is actually much more substantial than I thought it would be, and I think that there's a lot of excellent material to work with. I mean, I think that what we actually produced had, you know, enough integrity to stand on its own.
Right.
But I'm really looking forward to working with the material and you know, improving some spots and
right.
Yeah, and moving forward with it.
It's when we started talking about the work, we had begun in our discussions around a piece called Invisible Wings, and we did some early research around possibly hosting a residency that would be involved with mounting a production of that work, which was really your last major production before this one. In the research discovering that there wasn't that much Underground Railroad activity here, but then we realized there were these beautiful silos as well as community partners that we've worked closely with. We shifted to this project. Can you remind us, or remind me a little bit more about the origins? I know you were working in the Red Hook neighborhood over the past couple of years, and there I think was the original spark of inspiration around the metaphor of a silo in a neighborhood, and reflective of perhaps, as you've said, the dreams and aspirations of a neighborhood like Red Hook, or like our own Powderhorn here in the Twin Cities. Tell me about that link between what captivated your interest in silos, as well as how you feel it is reflective of the communities that you're working in.
Well, initially when, you know, this project started, or even before that, it was, you know, I was invited by Elise Bernhardt, who was the producer and executive director of Dancing in the Streets. She invited me to make a work for the Red Hook neighborhood, or in the Red Hook community, and they had just established a relationship at that time, and so I went in and I was like, sure, okay, I'll try something on.
Did you know the neighborhood at all?
Not at all, and I actually had lived in Brooklyn as a child, and it was, you know, something new to me. And actually, on my first visits, I actually went to my neighborhood that I hadn't been in I think in almost 30 years.
Oh.
And
which was what neighborhood?
It's Fort Greene.
Oh, Fort Greene, sure,
yeah.
Right, we're banned.
Right, yeah. And that was, you know, very eye-opening.
Right, yes.
But anyway, I went to Red Hook on maybe 3 or 4 occasions and spent, you know, maybe a week at a time, you know, so several days here and there, trying to figure out what I was going to do there.
Yeah.
And I had interviews with a lot of people, and a kind of a pretty broad range of people. And I'd say the majority of the people who I spoke to spoke about looking at Red Hook through different eyes, or through a different lens, and something on a more positive level, because it was a place that had been very misrepresented over the years in the press, and you know, it's similar to Powderhorn. You know, granted there were problems, and probably in Red Hook and in Bayview Hunters Point, where I am, the problems are more
more severe.
Yeah, more severe than here. There were still people who were really trying to make it a better place. Or, you know, there were still families that were, you know, bound together with love, and there was, you know, communities that, you know, community organizations that were really trying to, you know, make a mark, you know, in a positive way.
Right.
And they all said, you know, we really want somebody to speak about that, and just don't come in here, particularly as an outside person, and really start, you know, digging on our dark side, because it's really not fair. And of course, you know, all of that said and done, at the end of the interview was usually the burdens of all of the kind of social and economic dysfunctions came up, and it was very heavy and very sad, and so it felt important for me to listen to them, you know, on many levels about the positive thing, because it was weighing them down. It was really weighing them down.
The public perception of their neighborhood?
Yeah, and that, you know, they could never really rise above it, because, you know, even the people in the community just threw their hands up, because every time there was something reflected about them, you know, it was...
They felt they were already beaten in or some way.
Yeah, so it was, look at how we are, and you know, and you know how that cycle works.
Sure.
So, anyway, I mean, there were a couple of times I thought, oh, am I even up to this task? I mean, this is a little bit scary, but you know, sure, why not? You know, just try something new. And so we went around looking for places, and I was trying to think about, well, what I wanted to do, and I finally came to the conclusion that it was the dreams that I wanted to look into. What would people? What are they thinking about? In terms of what are they aspiring to? What do they really want their lives to be, and their experience with, you know, community to be? And we wandered around looking for a place, and Ali said, well, there's this one place around the corner, I don't know about this thing, you might not be interested. And it was this old grain elevator. And I thought, no, this is it, you know, because I had thought about projections at that time of, you know, making pictures, have this be a picture that people could use their imaginations, and, you know, not just, you know, the dance thing, but a more visual way. And so anyway, we came to this grain elevator, and
so really, from the start, the idea of projections and video, large-scale imagery was part
there.
of.
Yeah, because I kept thinking about dreaming. I was like, okay, dreaming, and we dream with pictures. So that seemed, and it was a new, it was a new direction for me. So artistically, I was like, well, yeah, okay, I could, you know, kind of explore this notion. And then, of course, coming to the grain elevator and seeing the size of, you know, a potential screen for a picture seemed fabulous. Besides the fact of what it really represented, you know, on the level of metaphor, the sustenance and the nurturing, and kind of the inherent hopefulness and future, and all of those things, and what it means, you know, throughout our country in terms of our landscape and architecture, and but in Red Hook and in Bayview Hunters Point, the elevators that are there have been abandoned for long periods of time, you know, between 15 and 20 years, and so there's a pretty prominent level of decay. And so there was another thing that was happening there at those sites, where it kind of represented the collapse of their economy and their world. So there was an interesting play there for me about you know, these two kind of opposite realities and metaphors that became very, very interesting.
I think around that point, when we were doing some explorations, you had come a couple of times to the Twin Cities, and we were even we were looking at Fort Snelling, around maybe looking at Dred Scott as something we were going to explore. We started seeing all these wonderful elevators here, and also you started meeting people in the Powderhorn neighborhood. And I think that around that time, we were tossing back and forth a lot of ideas around a visual artist that you maybe were considering using. And around that time, I think you began being intrigued by the idea of a piece that would happen in the breadbasket of the Midwest as well as on both coasts, so it had a sort of national relationship as well. when we began working in the Powderhorn community, did you see similarities between Powderhorn and the other neighborhoods that in Brooklyn and in the Bay Area as well?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main things that people have spoken about is the misconception of who and what the community is, and there,
right.
you know, as we call them, or I've come to call them, the troubled areas. You know, there's been a lot of drug trafficking and
right.
Some violence there, and you know, things that from the outside, if that's the only thing that's being, you know, publicly acknowledged, are the things that people identify
right.
the neighborhood with.
Right.
And Powderhorn, I think, more than any place else, has a really vibrant and, you know, the connection. You know,
right.
the people are very, very, they have a lot to hold them together
yeah.
as a community.
Right.
And that was really interesting to
yeah.
me, to actually see that.
As kind of maybe some of the threads that could be looked at by the other communities to help interweave
yeah.
some new
things. And there's there are mechanisms in place that never really get acknowledged.
Right.
But you know, obviously, there's a kind of a level of transition that's also happening.
Right.
Their renewal, and I guess, you know, this is always the thing that it is, because the two other cities are in that same situation, but there's always that kind of tenuous place. You know, it's like, well, who is actually going
right.
to be part of this renewal?
Right.
thing?
Sure.
You know,
right.
is it the people of the
who live
community
there now? Yeah.
now, or is it, you know, a whole group of developers that
right.
are introducing a new thing? So, but there's a certain tenacity that I think that the people in Powderhorn have, and I don't think that they're going to give it up.
Right. Right.
They're not going to give up their neighborhoods, and they do have some pretty strong ideas about direction.
Well, it's interesting too. I mean, I know it's different, but here we really found a site that's a working grain silo as a metaphor. How did that change your perspective on this particular piece, this installment of the Picture series of works? I know you've spoken before a little bit about the kind of sense of energy and life that this working silo exudes. Did it change how you approached working particularly on this site as a reflection of Powderhorn?
Well, the wonderful thing about working here is this very thing, that it's working, and I've actually gotten to have my hands on the grain and
right.
really been able to see how the reality of you know, an elevator's life.
Right.
And it's really perfect that it's at the beginning, because in the other places it's merely a memory.
Right.
And for me to be here, to be able to, you know, to help remember.
Right, sure.
To
also
realize, you
yeah.
know, or to understand a little bit of that memory is really, really useful. And it also really helped me understand what a huge influence and impact that these structures and the whole thing about grain has on our lives and in general. And this is really, you know, the hub. It's really nice to think about coming from, you know, the heartland, but
right.
the heart of, you know, the country here in terms of where our nourishment comes
right.
from.
Well, and I think it's interesting to have, I mean, that metaphor of distributing
yeah.
the movement of grain and of nourishment was clearly interwoven throughout your work. There was the movement of the grain in the beginning of the piece, and the transference of it then rising up to the top of this elevator, that you bringing the grain up to the top, and then the sense of it integrating then into the community, and how that food gets distributed, and then even in the image, and tell me if I read this correctly, but of the drop of the distribution almost in a global sense of grain imagery. At one point in the piece, the large box is dropped down by you down to the ground, slowly lowered. Is that some of the images that, or some of the metaphors that you were working
Yeah,
on?
you know, that one the kids had gone out and collected these pictures of the tortillas.
Oh, yes, right.
And I had said at the beginning of our session is this: go out and collect movement, things that move, not people that move, but events, activities that relate to working or machinery or
so
things that are
you were
moving.
asking them to look at movement, not just bodies moving, but really movement. Oh, I didn't realize that.
And so, so everybody split up into groups, and went out to capture things. Well, one group, which Mary Ellen was with, went out to the mercado, and of course they, found the tortilla man.
Right, sure.
And I saw that and I went, wow, that's so fantastic that, we have to have a whole section, based on the tortillas.
Right.
And very soon after that, we had a farmer. We interviewed a farmer to speak about grain from that perspective, and he said, sometimes I stand next to these things, after being around all these fields, and I realize that this grain that's coming in from everywhere eventually ends up in my tortilla chip. And I thought, wow, that's funny. Yeah. We have, not the chips, but we have these great tortillas. And, I mean, these were just kind of little funny, amusing stories, but in fact, it really spoke to, this, as the distribution as you're talking about, and then kind of the regeneration, all the different lives that it takes on, and then it goes through your body, and then you're producing, and then it just goes on and on and on indefinitely. Right. Feeding and producing, and I mean, even the fact that, as I said earlier, there's this grain fell out, and then suddenly it's sprouting some food over there in the corner, and and the sack that is given away, during and after the show is this, could very well start a beautiful garden for somebody. That it just is, something that is constantly regenerating or perpetuating itself and manifesting in new ways. And
that was I'm sorry. It was a wonderful choice you at one point a few weeks ago when you said, "What do you think about?" It was right before you came out, having small bags of grain filled and given to people, and again, it seemed to reinforce the kind of multi-dimensional experience that you're interested in creating for audiences. I mean, it's not just about witnessing a visual experience, but it's being out in a site like this. It's using different kinds of senses that people have that they typically don't employ perhaps in a standard staged performance. But then to add on top of that and to give them something, each audience member got a bag of grain with a word combine on it. Was that your thinking as well, to give them as another tactile experience?
Yeah, and something to take away and something that would grow.
Right.
And of course somebody said, and it's a really great de-stressor, it's something really great to play with in the end. And there's a great struggle looking for this word, but the word combine actually embraced everything, and including the harvest, which was, what was happening right now.
Right. Combine in the sense of combine.
Combine.
With the
it has
machinery.
This weird, kind of capitalistic thing too.
Right.
With joint ventures and stockholders, and then it's all about integration.
Right.
It speaks about participation in community.
Right.
There are all these. I was just like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, we finally,
found the word.
Found the word. Lucky, I had people out, and I said, okay, 10 words a day, everybody, and it has to say all these things. I had finally Wayne came up and said, I found it.
Back in the spring, going back in time a little bit more, as we started really seriously figuring out the project, you and Mary Ellen Strom, the video artist, came to this community and worked with some local educators, and with a hand-selected group of 17 young people to investigate the neighborhood of Powderhorn, to do research and to have an arts immersion experience. Why did you choose to work with young people on this project? I mean, was there something that you felt rang true for the work for the project?
Well, I mean, there were a number of reasons. I think that one big one was, we were trying to accomplish a lot in 3 different cities simultaneously.
Right.
And there was no way for us to spend that much time in each community in order to even to be able to afford to do that. And so we needed a research team. And it occurred to me that the kids would be kids would be the best
Right.
team, because they really did, you know, they were really kind of a reflection of the past and you know, a projection of the future at the same time. And so it just seemed, you know, kind of within the overall concept of everything. It was like, yeah, that's perfect.
Right.
And so anyway, Mary Ellen has worked with a lot of children, as Lauren has worked with a lot of children, and we have a school in San Francisco.
Right.
So, you know, we all agreed that that would, you know, that we would, you know, try to come together and create some kind of a learning experience for them, as well as really working with them as collaborators.
And how did you find the young people that you brought into the project here in the Twin Cities?
They were fabulous. I mean, you know, they didn't really have an audition, but they applied.
Right.
And their applications were so impressive. I mean, some of them, you know, more than, you know, college students, I thought, you know, and professionals for that matter. Like very thoughtful and articulate in their statements about who they were and what they were interested in terms of, you know, their participation in an artistic process like this, and their experiences, other experiences, and so on. And very, very eager to learn, could really, you know, apply information really well.
Right.
That some of them, you know, worked on the production, you know, when we arrived, and you know, one girl, Maggie, you know, acted as my personal assistant, and quite frankly, I couldn't have done it without her. I mean, she was right there. Was
she really here from the time you guys got here?
She came maybe a few days later, and she was an enormous help. I'm not just like the gopher, but you know, she interjected. You know, I was like, you know, you know, you really should think about doing this, because that one was
really.
Not, oh yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, she was very opinionated, but her contribution on that level was really spot on. I mean, really good.
Oh, that's great.
So. So yeah, they were great.
Well, and I think that you really captured that sense of what young people can bring in sense of an optimism and a positive look at their own community.
And some of them, you know, one of them said to me, and Maggie wrote about this too in her paper. She wrote a paper for school. She spoke about one of the kids, you know, she would come to the Pillsbury House and their other meeting place, and she would take the bus, and often she was at the beginning very frightened to walk by herself, and always, you know, try to organize people. And then by the end of the session, after being out, you know,
meeting
with the
people,
group and meeting people and talking to people, she wasn't afraid anymore. You know, and a lot of her fear was about all of the, you know, misconceptions and stereotypes, and so there were a lot of things that got a lot of things, myths that were dispelled, or that there was a lot of liberating moments for the kids.
And we concluded in some ways that phase of the project in May. You came back out, and we had a special kind of celebration in the Powderhorn neighborhood in the park, where the kids got a chance to do some performance work as well, and then we talked about the work and things like that. It kicked into a different phase then, in many ways, into the intensity of full production work. And you worked with, as we said before, a collaborator in Mary Ellen Strom in using video in a way you hadn't before. Was that how did that process go in terms of, did you like, and is it something you think in the future you'll continue to explore use of video imagery in your work and things like that? It's one of the big interesting ways that I found you. The scale of the video was so large, but you did figure a way to beautifully integrate the movers, who by their nature, your dancers, are quite small on the scale of these silos, but both through the use of live video and through the integration of them into the videos themselves, you found a way to make it all work together.
That was a big challenge.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and scary.
Yeah.
But
no, so
I was going to say, I don't know if I will ever use video again. I mean, it just seemed, I like to stay very flexible.
Right.
I mean, it's very possible
Yeah.
Yeah, but this just was about pictures. I just needed pictures, and I was thinking about lying down and closing my eyes and watching images float around like films, and that's really why they were there.
You know, you are, by most accounts, all accounts, that you're really both one of the leading site-specific artists in our country, and as well as considered a leader in aerial dance. If that's, it's a phrase that's often used in describing your work. I'm interested in what originally attracted you to doing site work. It's a question I'm sure you're asked often, but why not just produce work on stage? What is it that going out and all the additional challenges and difficulties that can be involved in site work, what is it that has continued to hold your attention in doing work like this?
I think the fact that I have to change, you know, that everything is different, is really interesting to me, and keeps my blood rushing, and keeps my skills honed, and it really demands that I gain new skills.
Right.
Of course, I started getting gray hairs now.
Well, I remember
my back started hurting, and my shoulders are feeling
and when
really low.
We met and talked after the opening night of Invisible Wings at the Pillow, and I felt bad how exhausted you were, and what a huge challenge it was, and I wondered, how do you keep it up, knowing we had a whole host of additional challenges here and things, you know, how you build the energy to then take on the next project.
Well, you know, there's a couple years in between.
Yes,
now,
right.
And now I've gotten smart about that. You know, I can't produce something, you know, I can't do this. And
one a year.
And I mean, there have been years in the past, long ago, where I would do 3 big projects in a year, but it's no longer interesting to me. I mean, a lot of, you know, in dance, people build repertories and then they perform 200 nights out of the year. And although I would really like to, I would have liked to have been able to run this show for a month or 2, or you know, to really be able to shape it, you know, and to, you know, fix all the timing problems and all the things, and really like do the work. Now we're actually got the thing moving. But, you know, often that's impossible because of, you know, variety of things. But but beyond, even with that, or despite that, I mean, it's really worth it to me to just the learning experience that I have to go through in order to produce a piece. It's just it's fantastic. I mean, it keeps my mind and my body sharp.
Right. What about the audience? Do you think that this is a future of where performance work will be going? Do you think it speaks to people in our age in a different way than perhaps going into a theater and sitting in a seat for 2 hours?
Well, yeah. I mean, it certainly reaches a lot more people, and this, I think, you know, is different in that you kind of have to know about this piece to get here. But you know, often things are happening where there are a lot of people who just pass by. But yeah, you know, there's a lot of, you know, the theater sometimes, or in some ways, has created a bit of. Some people perceive it as a kind of an elitist form or place, you know, situation or place, or and as you know, ticket prices go farther and farther up. I mean, it's supported. You know, those ideas are supported, and so I guess this is a way of bringing it back to the people. Or, I don't really know. It's hard to really say what's going to happen. I mean, I'm just hoping we're going to have art in the next 50 years in general. No matter where it is.
You have talked about sites being so special in the physical kind of context in defining meaning in the work, and in really talked about something you've referred to as place memory. Could you just explain that concept?
Yeah, this is something that a lot of artists, you know, that people call it different things, and a lot of, you know, there are people who call it place memory also, but it's not that something that I, you know,
that you've coined.
But it's really about a resonance of history, and and it's not always on the kind of the tangible or the conscious level that it rings out.
Right.
And there are there are a lot of invisible things that are still influencing the way that we're perceiving things, and we might not recognize this evidence, you know, on first view or whatever.
Right.
But it has a tremendous impact on what we're experiencing. And, you know, after a while, when you come to a place, you start digging. You know, like if we were to really take a look, you know, walk through this building,
right.
we would have probably, you know, several volumes of stories.
Sort of visceral and kinetic and
yeah,
other
and
kinds
real
of,
and things that we could probably just, you know, basically decipher.
Right.
You know, I mean, in terms of actual events, you know, through the paint, you know,
right.
and seeing that peel, and you know, the wearing of the steps,
right.
and you know,
right.
it's like how many years, you know, and particularly in a place like this because it's so old.
Right.
So, and then, you know, there are the energetic things that are left behind, you know,
right.
the things that even, you know, and this is actually tangible, even though you might not recognize it, the various things that are left in this earth.
Right.
I mean, the easiest thing to think about are, you know, all the radiation, for instance.
Yeah, right.
Invisible, you
right.
know.
But there.
And affecting you.
Right.
And it's about, you know, that's, you know, something that is, that's left behind from a very specific event, or, you know, a history of,
right.
of events and situations and so on. But, you know, that's also evident in cracks for different, you know, different histories and
right.
And so on and so forth.
And then you layer in on a work like this, I mean, even listening now to the sounds of the trains going by, I mean, Lauren's incredible layering of sound, not to mention the real sounds in the surrounding area, and then Mary Ellen's contribution. You're hitting people at so many different layers of experience.
Yeah. Also, you know, pitches have very strong influences on
right.
what's happening to, you know, to
physically.
your body. Yeah.
Sound pitches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
As does color.
Right.
You know, smells.
Right.
And you know, it's funny that this bag has had a real
the combined
bag. Yeah. You know, the smell of it has really affected people. So many
right.
people talk about, you know, this memory of things in their past and their grandparents and animals. You know, it's like it smells like we're on a farm. I mean, that's like the
right.
very basic thing. And then there are these very personal experiences that
right.
that it evokes for people. So this is so all of that, and we, you know, for the most part, we're just not aware of it, and you know, a lot of it has to do with the fact that people, you know, our culture has pretty much worked at cutting our people off from their deeper,
from those
from
memories
and our senses.
Right.
You know, people are smelling things, but they completely cut it off on a conscious level, so they're not really recognizing anything. They're not really aware of. And people walk like this now, and very few people really observe what's going on in the landscape.
Do you have a sense that the electronic and digital age is making that even more pronounced, the people's lack of kind
Probably.
of... Yeah. You know, when people talk about aerial dance, I'm not even sure how comfortable, I mean, I think it is a phrase that you use for your work as well, but do you feel like it's almost another form of movement, or that it is something that, I mean, does it need a separate set of lenses for people to evaluate it? Particularly your traditional dance critic that may come used to seeing movement on a stage and done in a certain way. I think we've seen in the last 5 or 10 years, many people follow yours and several other people's lead in elevating movement off of a traditional single dimension. Do you consider it another art form really in many ways, or do you see it as a thread of contemporary dance that just uses a much broader palette or greater number of dimensions?
You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, I guess so. I mean, you know, you know, over the last 20 or so years, it's been really difficult for me, you know,
Right.
to get to this place where, you know, I actually
Sure.
can be acknowledged as, you know, a real artist.
Right.
Finally.
Because people think of it as
some sensational thing, or just like it's a circus thing.
Right. Trapeze
Whatever,
related, or this or
you
that.
know,
Yeah.
it's just like, so people walking around, what does that have to do with dance? And, you know, so I was trying to struggle, it's like, what, am I a choreographer? I mean, what am I actually doing? And, you know, in the broader sense of, you know, I often think of myself as a visual artist or a sculptor almost, and using moving bodies,
Right,
you know, to
right.
define the space or whatever. But, you know, I don't know, but the very core of my training is a dancer. I'm a dancer.
Right.
I go to ballet class every day, even though you'd never know that with, you know, looking at the work.
Right.
I mean, but you know, that's where my heart is.
Right.
Anyway, but I guess the aesthetic is now where there's some blurred lines.
Right.
But I mean, the reason why I got interested or pursued working with dancers in the air was really about you describing space and giving it more dimension and giving, you know, a performance area more volume, and, you know, really trying to highlight areas in a particular environment that people just normally won't look at.
Right.
You know.
Right.
And being able to, you know, open up the space a little bit more, and you know, to be able to draw longer lines, and being able to manipulate our perception of time,
Right.
because there are, you know, as you know, it's like I can speed things up and then I can slow them down.
Right.
Create all these different illusions around weightlessness, and, you know, because frankly we're not.
Right. Right.
You know, gravity. You know, it's like, actually there's lots of it. You know, when you're working with.
But you defy it in a way.
Yeah,
You know.
well, it looks like we're defying it, but in fact we're not.
No,
you know,
you're using it.
yeah, we're using it.
Right.
So you know, all those things kind of put together, you know, it's just I don't know, it kind of gives me a broader palette.
Right. Are you encouraged by the sort of greater acceptance of this form?
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's funny because when I go to often people say, "Oh, your work must be like
Right.
so-and-so's because you do
Right.
stuff in the air," and it's like, well, actually, in fact, it isn't at all.
Yeah.
And it's really nice that, you know, even though, you know, we can share a form that it has a kind of a broader
Lots of
meaning.
applications.
Lots of applications.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I wonder, I know, sort of returning back for a second to Picture Powderhorn, one of the things that the work really embraced was these many layers of I don't want to use the word narrative, because I think your work is non-narrative, but it's lots of, and you've referred to this before, characters in a certain way, and themes in this work of agriculture, of the neighborhood of Powderhorn, of this silo and its history, of just work, the sort of a tribute to work in general. I wondered if you could relate a little bit about how you so nicely sort of layered and integrated those different thematic threads. I know that, for instance, the piece was structured carefully so that you would take people through both what this site represented and its history, but then into the neighborhood. And was that a challenge to integrate those different thematic threads?
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to make something that was more poetic in nature, and it was a challenge to try to, you know, to give people a sense that there was an inner city community, linked to this larger poetic form,
and you had people who were both deeply involved with the community, as well as people who had never heard of Powderhorn coming to this work too.
And you know, I don't know that, you know, so much of this I was running on intuition, which is you know, often, actually that's probably always how I'm
very
working.
good,
you work with that, and then you try to put all the calculations in place of, you know, making those things that come to you in the middle of the night manifest. And you know, the more and more I would think about the structure, the more things started to make sense to me. And you know, I spent a lot of time listening to people speak, you know, during their interviews, and
going back to the tapes.
and and it seemed like what people were saying really did. They spoke to much larger concerns, you know, that had to do with people as a whole. I mean,
Right.
how we function and what our interests are if we're here or if we're in
Brooklyn
or anywhere else. And I had a thought the other day that it might be really interesting to actually move around the world a little bit and see if that ever changes.
Huh.
You know, because the what people really wanted in these three cities was very much the same. I mean, you know, the problems had, or you know, some of the solutions that they had might have had a different character, a different dress on. You know,
Right.
This one needs more schools, but that one needs more playgrounds, or this one needs, you know, more whatever. But it was all really about their children and
Right.
feeling secure and that kind of thing. But
so the universal nature of the work, the kind of general, more national and global themes, is very intentional, and you see it being maintained certainly in the next installments of the work.
Yeah, I do. But you know, maybe given, you know, where some people were speaking about, we needed more of our community. We needed more specific things. Maybe that's something to look at. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know.
Do you see the Picture Bayview and Picture Red Hook being dramatically different works, or do you see really having achieved a template kind of?
I think we've got a template, and now, you know, it's just maybe I'll add a little more color over in this area,
Right.
or
Yeah.
you know. But I think that the structure of it is one that I'm interested in continuing with.
You probably don't want to think about this question, but where do you see your work going
in the
from
future?
here?
Yeah.
You mentioned you're collaborating
no,
Pauline.
no.
And,
I already told Eleanor. I said, well, it's going to be a solo. Next piece is
on
going
a
to be
10-foot by 10-foot
platform in the middle of, you know, a town square in the afternoon.
Right.
And I'm going to be singing and doing my own sound effects. And,
Right.
No lighting except for the sun.
That will be your next major departure.
Yeah.
Well, I really...
Hard to say.
Yeah, and thanks for taking this time, and it's been a tremendous honor and pleasure to be working with you on this project. And
the honor and pleasure is all mine.
we'll have that for history. And,
Yeah.
Okay.